what we're going to do, this is two sessions, one session but broken up into two pieces. We're going to basically look at how do we define missional communities, how do we define what they're not, and then how do we begin to form them and equip people to lead them, and then what does it look like for them to lead them to the place at which they would be effective in reaching people, making disciples, and multiplying out to see more accomplished and eventually see churches started as a result. So that's where we're going. If you want these notes, and there's plenty more, you can go to somacommunities.org and you can just look up Soma School. It's probably where you'll want to look. And then you'll find a lot of this and more. But the particular session we're doing is how to form and build missional communities. So you can download all those notes. There's about 13 pages of notes you can download if you want. We're not necessarily going through all 13, but if you want more stuff, you can have it. So that's there for you. We're also forming a thing called the GCMcollective.org, where we're bringing some other churches that are like us. Steve Timmis and Tim Chester wrote the book Total Church. Dave Fairchild, Drew Goodmanson are leading a church planting church in Kaleo. It's called Kaleo. It's in San Diego. And then us in Tacoma. The three of our churches are coming together to form a collective to make resources, training, consulting, coaching available. All of our stuff's going to come onto one blog. We just realized, why try to do it all alone? Let's come and work together and help each other. We're going to be inviting more and more people into that, and it'll have a bit of an open source feel to it eventually, where new stuff that's getting developed will be put up there. So that's going to be launched on March 1st, and you'll see way more resources than you've ever imagined in that place for you, and in particular around gospel communities on mission. So we'd love to. We're trying to make stuff available for you. So what I want to start with is our definition of how we would define a missional community. We would say that a missional community is a gospel community, and that when we say gospel community, we're saying a family, a group of believers who have been formed by the gospel or are being formed by the gospel. So they're living their life as a family, meaning they're not seeing this as just a thing they do or a curriculum they go through, but they're realigning their life to say, what would it look like if we loved one another as brothers and sisters, and we love those that maybe are the lost children of God in our neighborhood around us as though they were our brothers and sisters as well.
Isn't it interesting how we often think of like, we're in and they're out? Isn't that just a super way to start a relationship? Like, doesn't that just set you right on a trajectory of love and joy and like acceptance, you know? And the truth of the matter is, if you look in Scripture, there is like the terms like, those who have been saved were the children of God. But God actually also says that we all have the same Father, right? And we all have the same last name, right? We all come from the same family. The truth of the matter is we're completely just like everybody in the same family, but we've had a restored relationship with Dad, right? And so we suggest that you look at everyone like your family. They're just a brother or sister that's kind of estranged from Dad. Like, do anybody have like a brother or sister in your family that for whatever reason is just not getting along with the parents right now? You know what I'm saying? And so they're still your brother or sister, but they think Dad doesn't love them. So they don't come to Christmas, they don't come to Thanksgiving or whatever, right? But the truth of the matter is, in this case, Dad does love you. In fact, he loved you enough to send one of your other brothers to die. You know, so think of them as family.
And of course, that we know that there's a day coming when we'll know those who are truly His, but we don't really know. And we act as though we know. And we ought to act as though we are anticipating that there are those out there that are brothers and sisters that are coming back to the Father. And that's the reason why you live where you live. And if the church actually believed there are people that are going to come to the Father through Christ that live by me, and He's going to use us to do that, I think their witness and their boldness in witnessing and sharing their lives would go way up. Because it would just be like, well, they're across the street. All I got to do is go tell them. Why wouldn't I invite them in? But I'm convinced most of the church doesn't really believe that God put them where they live because there's people around them that He's going to bring back to Himself through Jesus. If they believed it, they'd be very urgent about getting that person into the family quick, because there's lots to enjoy when we're in the family of God. I know for me, my neighbor Nikki is a widow whose husband passed away about 16 years ago, and she became a recluse, not a believer. Really kind of, she's a hoarder, so I mean, her life's really just falling apart. And I remember the day my wife and I we've been praying for her, trying to love her, care for her, and nothing was working. Nothing was, there's no hope almost. My wife came over one day and said, I mean, she would knock over our garbage cans with her van, you know. She would like bang on her wall when we were outside talking with our friends. I mean, it just was not a good relationship. And she just came home, and my wife said, that's it, I give up on Nikki. There's no hope for her. And there's nothing I can do. And God, you're going to have to do something. Which, by the way, is a good starting point. Yeah, it's always the best place to start. There's nothing I can do. God's still going to have to do something you do. And then sure enough, she shows up the next day, needs to get a ride to the hospital because she's having chest pains, doesn't want to call an ambulance because she doesn't want the neighborhood to know she's in need. Her van broke down, so she can't get there. So we just started to say, what if Nikki was our mother? How would we care for her? I'll tell you, that will mess you up if you really think that way. Like if my mom was next door, a hoarder, and her house was falling apart, and her van was broken down, and she needed to get to the hospital, what would I do?
Even if she was grumpy, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I'd fix her van, we'd work on her house, we'd fix that, we'd pray like crazy that she would stop hoarding, we'd help her get healthy in that way. We'd do everything we can to help my mom get healthy in the gospel. And that was the shift I needed. This idea of being family has radically changed our church and all that we do. Because instead of thinking, what would a business do? Or what would a church do? And sometimes when we say church, we mean an organizational structure or whatever it may be. We say, if we are the family of God, what would we do? And how would the family of God work? And how would the family of God love those who maybe are also his family there in our neighborhood that we're called to reach? And that is a key, by the way. When we're talking about how do we form people into a missional community, they've got to get this. Because they won't rearrange their lives to be the family of God, which Jesus said is the greatest apologetic we have. Francis made that real clear last night, our love for one another. If they don't love one another like that, the strongest apologetic of the gospel is non-existent in the church, which is our love for one another. And then when we love others as though they're being called to God because we want them to know what the Father is like by the way we love them like the Father loved us, then they get to see what the God family looks like, what our Father is like.
But by the way, the reason I wrote this up here is God has led us in Soma communities to see our identity as primary, right? Otherwise, if we don't, our being doesn't precede our doing, then we're under the law, aren't we? We're just doing stuff. And so we've tried to help ourselves and our community get their brains around this and our hearts around it. And so you're going to see these things emerging that we think our identity in Christ can be kind of summed up in these four ideas of being family, missionaries, servants, and learners. So this will flow out. I'm just kind of giving you a little, so you're wondering why. And then these are 6 cultural rhythms that are true of every culture throughout every country, all time. Okay? And how we sort of figured these out was looking at Jesus and his time and his disciples and what they were up to and Acts 1 and Acts. And we realized, wait a minute, that's the same stuff that's true everywhere and true for us. And so we'll connect the dots and all that, but I just want to give you an idea. As you hear these words coming out, these are our identities in Christ. This is who we are, okay?
And this came about, I'm kind of pausing from the definition, so you might want to leave space in your notes to write the rest of the definition, like probably 4 or 5 lines. But this came about because as we started calling people to mission, we did what I think a lot of people do, is that we tried to motivate with vision and core values and all the stuff that we tend to do when we plant a church. That's what a lot of people teach you. You won't necessarily find it in the scriptures, but it's kind of I think a church growth plan. And so we did all that, and what we found was we were putting a heavy burden on the backs of people to go do.
Go be missional.
And if they would go do it, then they would be something. Like if you do this, you'll be good Christians. If you do this, I'll be happy with you. If you do this, the church will be very effective and successful. And so our doing, like Caesar said, starts to precede our being. What we do produces who we are. But in the gospel, it's the other way around. It's our being that leads to our doing. It's what Jesus has done that leads to who we are, which leads to what we do. And that's always the flow in Scriptures. Who God is, what He's done, who we are because of what He's done, and how we live in light of who we are. That's how it works.
If you get nothing else today but that, it'll transform the way you see and interact as church.
Can you repeat that?
So the...
No, I'm kidding.
Oh, okay.
You had a question, brother.
You're funny.
You're already elaborating on it. The geographic component. I mean, those of us that are coming out of a more traditional model or traditional model or whatever, they disperse it to cell churches or cell groups
We're going to get there. Yeah, we'll get there. The question being, how important is geography and mission? So we'll get there.
Yeah. Proximity is a big deal, and we're going to talk a lot about it. Good question. All right, maybe we should read through the whole thing. And
so I'll read through the whole thing and then we'll unpack it so you can get it. A missional community is a gospel community, that's family, that lives out the mission of God together in a specific area and to a particular people group.
That's missionaries.
That's missionaries. So I'll say that again. Lives out the mission of God together in a specific area and to a particular people group. That's missionary. That's what a missionary does. They're being sent to a particular people group. By demonstrating the gospel in tangible forms, that's servants, demonstrating the gospel in tangible forms. So they're a family sent as missionaries to a people group, demonstrating the gospel in tangible forms as servants. Saying, okay, what does the gospel look like? And then declaring the gospel to others, both those who believe, so we're speaking the truth in love, which is the gospel to each other as believers, and to those who don't believe, which are the people God's sending us to make disciples of. That's the learner identity. You might call it disciple, but in our area of the country, that kind of had some weird language. You know, people understood disciple a little weird. So you might be okay with disciple where you live. For us, learner was a better identity. And it also communicated we take responsibility for our own development and the development of others. We're not just sitting around going, feed me, feed me, feed me. We're saying, help me grow so I can help others grow. So I can go live out what I've been called to do. That's the idea.
Usually we're kind of taught to be baby birds. We go to church. And we wait for the pastor to preach you the word and spit a little into our beak, right? You know? That's not the idea of a disciple or a learner. The idea is you take responsibility for your own learning because God's given you His Spirit, His book, His Word, and the learning of your community. Very different than a teaching community. We're a teaching church. We're a teaching community. Any of you who teach know you can teach your guts out and doesn't mean that anybody learned anything. You ever do that?
Or that they lived it. I mean, I listened clearly to what Francis said last night. So many people articulate the Great Commission as you know everything Jesus taught instead of you obey everything Jesus taught. And it says you're supposed to teach them to obey everything He commanded us.
That's the commission. Yeah.
So to clarify, though, just to make sure in terms of understanding what we'd say it's not, is that all right to move forward?
Yeah.
Okay. We would say fundamentally it's not several things. One, it's not primarily a small group.
A missional community is not primarily these things.
Though it is probably a small group. But for us, we've had to articulate that because as we're training people and we get people from a church background, they immediately kind of lump into a missional community all they're thinking of small group, which oftentimes was Christians getting together to study the Bible, enjoy fellowship, because largely they may not be able to get that at the gathering. So it was kind of like the way to supplement what you weren't getting at the gathering. We would say it's almost the opposite. The gathering is to supplement the equipping of the saints for the works of ministry all week long, and the missional community is a small group of people committed to that. So a very different thinking that way. So we clarify that.
And you're going to see our model is sort of upside down. Instead of we try to get a whole lot of people into Sunday and then figure out if they're actually living it out the 622, we say, the other 6 days and 22 hours of the week. We do it the other way around. We really focus on how are we living the 622, and then guess what? We get to come and celebrate all that God did, all that Jesus continued to do through His people all week. And we sing and we do communion and all the stuff, you know, that we all love to do, and actually Scripture commands in some of the cases. It's just that that's the result of living in life in the Spirit, right, doing Jesus' work. Okay, so just so you kind of hear that. So we're not talking primarily small group. A missional community is not primarily a Bible study. Though, please, I hope within your communities you're studying the Word. But it's not that. It's not primarily that. In other words, the goal is not like we pick a time in an hour, a couple hours, and we just study the Bible and then we go home. Okay? The Word is central to who we are as the people of God. It's living. It's active. It's not a book, by the way. Bible's, you know, we don't worship the pages, the pulp, the tree, you know what I mean? It was like squished down and ink was put onto it. We worship the God of it. But a missional community is not primarily a small group. See?
And not a Bible study, yeah.
And
what we've found is that people who study the Bible without mission and without ministry are studying it as a replacement too, as a way to justify themselves. So they think by doing Bible studies, they're better Christians.
If we just have enough.
So I got to study more. I got to study more. And I usually say, how much do you know and how much have you lived out? Because the point of your studying was to equip you so that you might be faithful to all that he said. So that's where I usually go. So people go, I just need one more Bible study. I'll go, what's the last one you did? Okay, how much of that have you put into practice? Because that's what we're supposed to do. We're devoted to the apostles' teaching, not just the knowledge of it, the living out of what they said. And so often I'll say Acts 2, it gets misunderstood. People think if you just teach the Bible, you'll be a good church. But it comes out of Acts 1, which was a people sent by Jesus on his mission, deeply embedded in the gospel, knowing who they are in Christ and what he's done, and empowered by the Spirit to do it. And then you get Acts 2. So if you don't have mission, you don't have gospel, and you don't have the Spirit, if you just do Acts 2, you basically have a works mentality of church. If we do these things, we'll be a church. Instead of Jesus building his church through his gospel, Spirit, and his people being his missionaries. So it's different. You got to think Acts 1 before Acts 2. And then you don't think, I got to do a Bible study. You say, what do our people need to know in order to be faithful to what the mission God's called us to? And then you open your Bible. Okay? Different way to look at
being
your scriptures.
faithful to what we've learned, right? How many of us even have that equation when we think, hey, we're supposed to be equipping these people, teaching them? I wonder if part of the teaching, equipping phase should be doing, obeying. I've actually had people in my missional community at times go, hey, when are we gonna get back into a deep study of the Word? I'm like, well, we haven't been obedient yet to the last deep study of the Word. And so, seriously, I'm not even joking. So I'm not going to spend the time to prep up another deep study of the Word that we can disobey. So we're going to go back to the last one.
He's not lying either. That's
Not lying.
exactly what he's saying.
And we're going to work that one out and repent and ask God to make this real in our lives and grant us that.
When we first started Soman, I was telling you the story in the bigger session briefly. We would, every time we would look at the Word, we'd say, okay, now what are we going to do about that? How are we going to live this out? What's it going to look like? And we always say that. Good preachers always say application. But how many times have you heard someone give application, and the next week they have a new application, the next week a new application, the next week a new application, and the people are sitting there going, way to go, that's a great application. Somebody needs to do that. Right?
Somebody should really do that.
But nobody there is doing it. And so we want to make sure if we're going to study the Bible, we're going to do it in the proximity of relationship on a mission together where we actually live out what the Word says together. So it's not just a Bible study, though you'll study it. It's not a support group. That's the third one. And in other words, it's not just, hey, let's all take care of each other's needs forever. You know, think about a healthy family. A healthy family doesn't have kids stay in the house until they're 60 years old, though there are some who stay till 30 or 40 these days, and that's a problem. You know? And yet, you'd say a healthy family is a family who is able to train up their children so they can start a family. So they themselves can be adults. And it used to be, you're 13, 14, and you started a family. Many, many years ago, of course. Now it's
like me.
Now it's about 30, and 30 years old, and that's the new adolescence in North America, is the age of 30. So that's a problem. Well, the church's age of adolescence is much worse than that. I mean, I think for some, it's 60 years old, 50 years old, 40 years old, and they still don't know how to do the work of ministry. And so, but a support group kind of can encourage that. You'll probably support each other, but you want to support each other to grow up in the faith.
What's the point of binding up one another? So that we could go do the mission, right? Not so we'll just be mummies all wrapped up, advantage. We're also saying that a missional community is not primarily a social activist group, okay? You're probably going to identify many needs within your community that you will address as an aspect of displaying the gospel so that you can make disciples of people. But if your missional community becomes all about cleaning the park or saving the whales, that's good. But if it's all about that, you're missing the gospel, right? Right? And so, does God care about the whales? Were we given the mandate to care for the planet and clean it and care for the garden? Absolutely. But the mission, the only mission we've ever been given, is what? Make disciples. See it? It's the only one. Make disciples, and nothing.
And if they're good disciples, they'll probably care for the planet. That'll be an outcome, but it can't be the only focus.
Don't miss that. You know, in our history of the church, the pendulum swings back and forth from we live in a box and we study the book, and then, well, my gosh, we have to get out there, and so then we go out, and now we're just feeding the homeless, and you know, everything, and there's no gospel, and we're not even sure everybody's Christian or doesn't need to be to even be gospel ministers, or you know what I'm saying? And then it swings back the other way. So a missional community is not primarily a social activist group, though you might do those types of things as you make disciples.
This, by the way, is really important to clarify. I was at a conference a little bit ago, and an older gentleman got up and said, I just think missional is the new seeker. It's just a fad, and I watched that come, and now I'm going to see this come. And then he defined it as missional was mercy ministries, social activism, the church finally getting their hands dirty. And I said, someone asked, Jeff, would you like to respond to that? And I said, I'd like to just correct that definition, though that may be how some people are seeing it. The way when we say missional, what we mean is God's church is so saturated in the gospel and the mission of Jesus that they see themselves as the sent ones of Jesus in all of life to make disciples who make disciples so that the earth gets saturated with people who love Jesus and God is glorified in all things. That's what I mean when I say missional. So, and he's like, well, that's not what I thought missional was. And I said, well, I want to make sure you understand there are lots of definitions out there, but when I say that, that's what I mean. And then when we talk about that as missional communities, that's what we mean. And a lot of our people even slipped into the idea of saying mission will be cleaning up a park. And you know, you can be an unbeliever and do that. And I'm not saying you shouldn't clean up a park, but you better know that you have a much higher calling than restoring a park. There's souls to be saved. So bring souls with you while you restore the park and tell them why you're restoring a park, because you love Jesus, because he gave his life for you, and now you're giving your life for the planet he created. Like, do that then, you know, but don't leave him out of the equation and don't leave the mission out of the equation. So, yeah.
We've seen some of that in our community. How have you helped correct groups that become like that?
Well, for us, we won't let a missional community get started, like a leader get commissioned to start a new work, unless they have clarified a people group that they're being sent to. And they actually have to, and we'll unpack that a little bit more, but they actually have to have a people group they believe God's sending them to. And then they'll talk about the places that they're going to do work in, but they have people in mind when they do it. So
early on, when our mission communities were forming, they weren't even called that. We actually coined that term. No, I'm just kidding.
I don't know who did.
I'm not sure who did. But I don't know, we called them a million things. Home group, church, home group, church group, home, I don't know. But when we started on early, we found our people were being good family together. They really were starting to. Like, we hadn't experienced community to that level. Like, it was, people were really caring for one another and caring for their neighbors pretty well. But they were doing missional activities like go clean a park, or let's adopt this school, you know, or whatever. And those were good things, and we still do them. But we realized they have to be connected to a people group that you're making disciples of. So if we're going to, if our missional community says part of our mission is to make disciples of the teachers and faculty and students of that elementary school that's in our neighborhood, then we're going to clean that and de-tag it, you know, get all the spray painting off and de-weed the thing and all that, so that we can build relationship, displaying the gospel and proclaiming the gospel, and then inviting not yet believers along to do that with us, right? And that's key too. That's key too. Jesus said that if you'll walk in my ways, if you'll be my disciple, then you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. You catch the order of that. If you'll be my disciple and walk in my ways, in other words, do the things I did, obey my teachings, then you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. I was raised and pastored this way most of my life, flipped 180. If you'll believe what I say is the truth, what we say, because all Christians believe the exact same thing. If you believe this is true, then I'll lead you in the magic Jesus in your heart prayer. You'll get set free, and we'll start discipling you. It's exactly the opposite of what Jesus commanded. And it's exactly the opposite of what he modeled, didn't it? He discipled his disciples, and then after his death and resurrection, at his ascension, in Matthew it says, the 11 were there watching, and this breaks my heart, and some still did not believe. So either Jesus meant what he said about you disciple people to the knowledge of the truth that sets them free, or he was a horrible discipler. I'm going with the first one. You know?
And catch it, it's not a works salvation that he's saying. What he's saying, and you have to unpack this a little bit. when you lead people in the ways that Jesus called them to, and they realize that deep in their heart they rebel against it, that everything cries out against dying to yourself and all the things that Jesus calls you to, then you go, that's right. In order for you to really be saved, you're going to have to be saved from yourself. Saved from your selfishness, from your sin.
Why would you do this?
Yeah.
I would never want to do this. I know, me either, in of myself.
So when you're walking with them and they're seeing the power of Christ in you to enable you to love when people reject you, they're going to say, why do you keep doing this? Nobody would keep doing this. People hate you for this. People reject you for this. People use you for this. And you go, I just got to tell you, the reason why I do this is because of what he's done. And so you're discipling them to Jesus by calling them to walk in his ways that they can't do apart from Jesus. Not with a pure heart. Not with the right motives. And so we need someone to change us.
This works for believers too, okay, in the church that are saved. We say it this way. They've been saved to Jesus, but not his mission yet. And if you begin to lead them in the ways of Christ, so out dying to themselves, they will also come to the realization, i.e. the truth, I cannot do this on my own. I don't want to do it. I suck at it. I don't have any energy after work or when, after raising my kids all day or whatever it is. And the truth will set you free. You're right. You need to do this in the power of the Spirit of God, not under your own steam and flesh. That will kill you. That'll eat your lunch for you.
A lot of the people that have come to faith that are part of my mission and my missional community, they came to faith by me pulling them into the work of the church in the community and city that we live in. And then just seeing us loving one another, us giving of ourselves, us sacrificing our own resources to take care of other people's needs, and finally just going like, what is up with you guys? And then we got to, it's 1 Peter 3:15, apologetic. I think that's what Peter has in mind, always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that is in you. Right before that, he was talking about how you submit to your governing authorities, how you love your spouses, how you serve one another. I mean, he's talking about a life lived amongst people that demands an explanation. And the way I usually say it is, live a life in such a way that it demands a gospel explanation. If your life doesn't demand a gospel explanation, then the gospel you're preaching has no evidence that it's changed anything.
It's flat.
So, but when you're living a life that radically cannot be lived apart from the gospel, that's one of the strongest apologetics for why you would preach the gospel. It's to explain why we are the way we are. We give him glory for that. So.
Be the peculiar people.
So we spend a lot of time on the social activist thing because for a lot of people, and this is just happening all over the place, we think the church is not really supposed to talk to anybody about Jesus, just do good deeds. Preach the gospel,
The old quote?
At all times, and if necessary, use words. Get rid of the last part. The Romans says it is necessary to use words. How are they going to believe unless they hear? And how are they going to hear unless someone preaches? So you have to proclaim the gospel at some point. People don't get saved unless you do. Paul is a unique situation, and even Jesus had to proclaim the gospel to him. Okay? So everyone has to have it proclaimed. And the problem is, if you lead them to be a follower of Jesus without the gospel, you lead them into moralism. Say, be good people like us, and then Jesus will accept you and love you. That's what the church is. People who work really hard for him.
Quit doing drugs, quit sleeping around, you know what I mean? That's not salvation, is it? Try to live that perfect life under your own power and strength.
Now, flip side, just so you know, those of you who think you don't have to do any good deeds.
Yeah.
The Bible says, read Romans 1. What happens when all they get is general revelation? They're without excuse, but they don't have an answer. What happens if you get rid of general revelation, the demonstration of God's creative work and salvific work in our lives, but you only have proclamation? You end up with a confused people, right? Because they hear this message you talk about, but they never see it. And
that's kind of been the malady for a while, right, within our family, is they hear all about it, but then they look at the life and they go, one does not seem to equal the other. If what you're saying gets me that kind of sad like life, I'll just keep my own sad life. Got one of those, Question?
I'm just curious about this. I know you may not, because it's so organic, I'm not sure that you know this, but I was just curious about what is your, I don't know how you translate this, but how many people are coming to faith in your community? Like, do you have any kind of number thing, like conversion growth rate is the old church growth thing, but
yeah.
Any idea about that?
Some of it's hard to tell, I'll just tell you, because I think we're having a lot of Christians getting saved. I'm not kidding.
One aspect of it, you know what I mean?
And then we have, like my missional community last year, We started with 6 people. It grew to somewhere in the 20s, and we saw 4 conversions in 9 months in my little group. It doesn't always happen that many, but that's a pretty good proportion, starting with 6, 4 conversions, and then we grew to...
Do you have an idea, like in your missional community, do you have any kind of like, how many you suspect are following Jesus and how many...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But like, okay, the missional community I'm currently in, brand new one, we kind of start them and pass them on to other leaders at times. They multiply on their own as well. I would estimate that when we started this missional community, it was with a couple of believing families, my wife and I, and we started barbecuing with the neighbors and just started making relationships, okay, and praying like crazy. And once we felt like these few people seemed to be responding to this love and community thing, we prayed real specifically about when we were going to start. Our discipleship starts with a story-formed way. It's a 10-week story-based discipleship thing. And I would say at that point, it was about half and half if I could be the guess. There was a couple in there that would claim, oh, we're Christians. But as soon as we started doing the story and the dialogue, you're like, not so much. You know what I mean? Right? And there were some that weren't. We're just about through that 10 weeks now. And it's amazing, and I know the same thing happened in Jeff's community. It starts out with all their answers are like, well, they did that, and well, that's how they would be. And now it's like, well, we would have to do this.
Yeah.
You know, in other words, they now number themselves with those who would claim Christ as Lord.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
So the big number, like percentage-wise, is that what you're looking for? In terms of all of our communities?
No,
Yeah.
what I was going to ask in follow-up is, how do you keep that us versus them creeping in? When you have believers in there and they start that,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, I'll tell you that the story that he's referring to, instead of saying, like, okay, we're going to do a Bible study tonight, because as soon as you do that, all the believers are going, we're out. I mean, all the unbelievers are saying we're out.
I know nothing about
and
that.
all the
I'm going to
believers
feel
are
really
going,
awkward now.
Who's going to impress who, so they show that they know it really well. So
all the Hank Hanagraphs show up. Like,
yeah.
boom, you know.
So we fully...
Love Hank. I mean, but we need like one Hank in the world, you know what I'm saying? I don't need 4 in my missional community every night, you know?
So we take people through this, we call it the story of God or the story-formed way, and it's an oral telling of the redemptive plan of God. We don't read it.
Genesis through Acts.
Okay? But it's from here, and we see that pattern in Acts. They stood up and they would proclaim it, and they would summarize portions of the story so they would get the whole redemptive plan of God. This is how we tell the gospel in our community. But we do it in such a way that we do one story at a time, and we really interact over it.
A lot of dialogue.
And we tell all the Christians, you may not jump ahead of the story. You know, because they want to go like, well, you know, like what Adam did, that's like the second Adam, he did. And they're going, second Adam? Who's the second Adam? And so we'll go like, who are you talking about? I didn't hear of any second Adam here.
You can only answer from within the story, which levels it. So we've done the story of God in a room, in a missional community with Bible school grad, atheist, agnostic, single mom, not sure where she's at, a couple of people from our community, and it's level because we all have to answer from the story. Anyway, we're kind of getting off track a little bit. Sorry.
Can you speak a little bit to the proximity? Like, how do you bounce in and out of it?
So we're going to get to that. Yeah. If we keep moving, we'll get to this.
We'll
you guys
get
are
to
like,
that,
just
yeah.
get rid of it. Just go on.
Okay, last thing, it's not primarily.
This is huge. Listen
It's not
closely.
primarily a weekly meeting. Maybe I could have you all say that out loud with me. No, I won't. It's not primarily a weekly meeting, though you'll probably get together weekly, and hopefully a lot more than that. Like, can you imagine if you defined your family as a weekly meeting? Now, some of you go like, that'd be an upgrade. And how many of you in your family tried the weekly family meeting? That's super fun for the kids, right? This is family fun night, dang it, come on! Start it really young so all that absurd stuff feels like normal to them, you know? So.
And this is really important because people are prone in the church to a dualistic thinking of the church. So they see church as something, when they're at Sunday for 2 hours, that's church. And when they go home, that's their life. And then they even think through, man, church is asking a lot of us. I mean, we're doing a lot of stuff for the church, and they have this dualistic thinking, and the church has got to get rid of its dualism and say, you're the church, Everything you do now counts. The question is, are you doing the work of the church or not? And are you being faithful to the work of the church that Jesus gave us? That's the question. Well, the interesting thing is when you start a missional community, even for us, as much as we were trying to get away from the idea that church is all about Sunday, though we do gather on Sundays, our missional communities come together, though we made it so clear, you are the church, we are the church all the time, they'd start a missional community and then they would just replace it and go, I'm going to my missional community tonight. And we go, well, is that like you're going to it or are you it? And they'd be like, oh yeah, you're doing that we are the church thing again. I'm like, yeah, I am doing that thing.
This is our broken record. This is our broken record in Soma.
Yeah.
Like we say this like probably 2 or 3 Sunday mornings a month. Hey, if you came to church this morning, we're really glad you're here. You never get to go to church again.
The only people that get to go are unbelievers, and hopefully we go to them more than they come to us.
Yeah. You're either the church or you're not. So thanks for being here and gathering as the family of God, and it's an awesome thing to be. It's a high calling. So, and on we go. So that's like our broken record. You can't go to church. I mean, Jeff's kids will be like, where are you going? We're going to the building where the church goes to be together,
It's true. My daughter, she's like really self-righteous. We got to work on that. But she'll be like, Mom will say, let's go to church. She goes, Mom, we don't go to church. We are the church. That's right. Way to go.
Think about
You
how
teach your
bad
mom.
theology that is.
Yeah.
And we all say it. Hey, let's go to church. And we all say it. It's the worst theology.
Yeah.
It's so bad.
And some people think, well, that's just a matter of semantics. Yeah, and your words tell you what you believe. So I don't care if it's a matter of semantics. Your words state what you believe. So when you believe that you are the church, and you go, man, I can't wait to go gather with the church. Can't wait to meet with the family. So that's the language we use. I have a family meeting every Thursday night with my missional community. And it's a family meeting. We get together and we're loving on each other. We care for each other. And sometimes that family meeting gets translated into, we got some people coming to the table to eat with us that don't know Jesus, and we're going to start telling them about him for the next 10 weeks. So it's just it seems subtle. It's not. And when we say a missional community, we are certainly not meaning 2 hours of meeting. We are talking about a group of people who realign their lives radically for the sake of the gospel.
Hear that. Radically reorient your life around the gospel as a community. That's the goal. Piper says that a disciple of Jesus is someone who the gospel has begun to touch absolutely every aspect of their life. If it does, it changes your giving and how you eat and who you eat with and where you come and go and what you wear and how you spend your money and where you vacation and where you shop and how you speak to one another. See what I'm saying? So you might start out by having to get some people together and all they'll give you is once a week initially to talk about this. And then you got to just teach hard and live by example and call them to the life they were actually created to live. They'll love it once they die to all the muck and stuff of life. Okay? But it's not primarily a weekly meeting. It's a community. It's a family of missionaries out serving their culture, continually learning how to do that.
Okay.
Make sense? Okay.
Okay, your hand went up and then yours.
Yeah, my question is like, how do you paraphrase the gospel in an instance to where like non-believers understand? Because most non-believers, hang out at a bar or whatever, they don't understand the vocab of the gospel, so I have trouble with that.
Well,
how do I say?
Yeah, how do you paraphrase the gospel? Yeah, how do you say it differently? We're not going to teach on that here because that's a whole other class.
Okay.
But I will say, just to help you, if you don't have a good biblical theology, meaning you don't know the redemptive plan of God throughout all of Scriptures, and you don't know how to point to Jesus in every part of the text of Scripture, pretty hard to declare the gospel in unique contexts in different ways. Then what you do is you just get a little bridge diagram and you only know one way to do it, which doesn't make sense to a lot of people, and it assumes a whole lot of understanding previous to that conversation. So that's a bigger conversation. We train our people in how to understand the story, how to understand the story of the culture, how to articulate the gospel in ways that make sense to that culture. It's a whole training we do on how to articulate the gospel. We'll unpack that as we connect these dots, but we're not going to do the training because that's...
Is that training online?
There's some of it online, yeah. Engaging in gospel conversations is one of them. Engaging in the story is another. So there's a few.
No, you got to understand too. We start all of our missional
it will be.
communities on the story of God, because we realize our culture where we live, it's like second, third generation post-Christian. Like for many, high percentage. They're like, "You ever been to church? No. Parents? For a wedding? I think. I think my grandma used to go, you know, something like that. That's where they're at. It's not like it used to be, and it's not like, it's not all Texas. You know what I mean? Though we have 300 churches or something, buildings, church buildings in Tacoma, there's like nobody in any of them, you know, and they're certainly not living it mostly. But, yeah, anyway.
So, but just so you see this, because you probably don't see this, and this is how we see it. We see three parts to what we're doing in our training all the time. We're always training them the gospel, who God is and what He's done in the person and work of Jesus Christ. We're training them in who they are in Christ. That's their gospel identity. And who they are is grounded in the gospel. And then how they live out all of life with gospel intentionality. So if you hear that, it's like head, the gospel, what you know, heart, how you've been changed by it, and hands, how you live it out in everyday life. And that training, we're so saturating people with gospel constantly that they have tons of ways to explain it. Because everything is gospel for us. We don't teach anything but the gospel. We believe it's the whole thing. It's not just the starting point of Christianity. It's the whole of it. And if you have anything else but it, you're adding to it and you're in trouble. You're creating a legalism, and then you're going to be in trouble because people believe another gospel that you've added to. So, yeah.
I was just going to ask, now obviously this wouldn't be the case for unbelievers, but for those who at least claim to be believers when wanting to get involved with the missional community at Soma, do you guys like require that they kind of come under this understanding before they become a part of that missional community? With a kind of an organic setup like that, I kind of wonder if, you know, obviously you wouldn't require...
Are you asking if the Christians will ruin it?
Yeah,
Sometimes they do.
Well, completely,
Yeah.
especially the people...
But we're a community. We're a community, and probably we're going to have many, many opportunities as a family to discuss those kinds of things. And I'm getting to know them. We're getting to know each other. And when their language is weird and churchy, we go like, what does that mean? I don't know. That's what we've always said that. I'm like, let me ask you. And we train this way. Like we say, imagine you're going through your training today, because everything has to be reproducible. Okay? Imagine you're going through your training today. In fact, you could all do this today. Imagine you're going through this, and somebody you know who's not yet restored to Dad in the right way is sitting next to you. Are you teaching and communicating and training with language that the people then could use and communicate with? See, what often happens is we only hear spiritual stuff and gospel stuff and churchy stuff at church. Okay, bad theology. I'm just using the nomenclature of the culture here. We go to church and we hear this like language that's scientific kind of at best, right, around the Bible stuff. And it's the only thing we get unless we dial up Christian radio and we get another bunch of doses of that. But that doesn't really make sense to anybody we know that doesn't come from that culture. It'd be like going and speaking French in like Italy, you know? Like, not working super. So you have to teach and communicate and train and gospel and preach all with really normal language and terminology so that people, it spills out of them normatively. You know what I'm saying? So you can't go, brother, could I explain? You know, I was noticing when you were cutting the lawn the other day, I need to explain to you substitutionary atonement, you know?
So you're asking,
I'm talking more from the start.
how do we assimilate them into a group or help them get started in a group to understand what we're all about?
Yeah, because obviously you train certain people. You say you have training to go through to help people when they start missional communities, or at least to be a missional community, right? And they start these things. But the problem, at least that I would say for a lot of American Christianity, is that, you know, Christians will buy onto that. People who claim to be Christians will buy on and say, yeah, I want to be part of that too. But even like you were referencing before, the story idea, like, you know, they'll immediately go to something that's like, oh yeah, and then in Mark it says that, and you're like,
Yeah. So you disciple them. So yeah, that's a great question. Did y'all hear it? Okay. Basically, he's asking how do you help somebody who's probably got church or Christian background, is coming into your group, begin to understand how to engage in mission and ministry, and so because the reality is, if you're doing any kind of ministry in North America, you're going to get Christians eventually into your groups. You know, if you want to start purely with non-believers, eventually Christians are coming. And whether they truly are or not, we don't know.
The Christians are coming.
But they're culturally, they're cultural Christians.
One of my land, two of my sea.
And so we'll walk through a process of how we even started a missional community to help address that question. First of all, we'll start with shared leadership, and those are people who do get it. Okay, so they either had to have gone through a missional community already, so they've been trained, or they've gone through our training to help them know how to do it with somebody. And that the leader who's going to lead goes through an assessment. Like we need to know that they understand the gospel. They can they understand how to engage their culture. We're taking the time. Do they get it? And I don't have to do this as much with the non-believers that become Christians because they get it. Right. It's the Christian people that we've got to like retrain and get rid of the trappings that they bought into. So we do that, and we do it through a variety of means. But they don't get to lead a missional community unless they've either been in one or really gone through some training, and then they've been assessed. And we are convinced that they can do this through a lot of things. Head, heart, hands. It's these three things. We have a full assessment for them. We walk them through that.
Tell us a little bit more about the assessment. What does that look like? Is that a conversation? Is that a...
Well, it starts with if they're living it with other people first. So if they're in a mission, recently David Wilcox, the guy who's in a missional community, theirs grew quite a bit. He'd been growing in his learning of how to do it,
Say
how
hi,
to engage
Dave.
it.
He's listening.
Yeah, he'll see this probably. And then the leaders said David is evidently getting this, understanding this, living this out. They brought him to us and said, what's next? How do we help David take the next steps to be sent out to start his own missional community? And we just basically said.
So pause 1 second. So David now has been living in a missional community for a couple, 3 years. He's been through the story of God many, many times, led people to the Lord. He serves like crazy. We've been able to watch. He's faithful. Do you know what I mean? We hear his language. Does he get the gospel? Is he able to articulate the gospel in setting, not like a list of facts, but apply it, you know? That's what we're watching for.
So they say, yeah, that's the life he's living. And then we've, as elders, put in a checkpoint just to say, hey, let's sit down and make sure that they are doing a good job developing him, training him, so that it is in line with what we hope is happening, instead of just assuming it's happening. And so I sat down with him and assessed him. And it was a theological assessment, a character assessment, and a methodological assessment.
It's actually the same one we do for elders.
Yeah, it's our elder level assessment. Because we believe that they're becoming elders. That's what we're doing. So we're training up elders this way. So then, and then at the end of that, we usually have a yes, or there's some more training or development we'd like to see you go through. At that point, he also has to articulate what his mission is, how he's looking to mobilize people toward it, what his plan would look like. Because we don't want to just send him out and go, good luck. We want to at least make sure he has an idea of what he's doing and they can go there. And again, that took more time with him than Randy, who I had for 9 months in my missional community, and he just started a new missional community because he's only a 4-year-old believer. So he wasn't as steeped in Christianity. It didn't take him as long.
To peel back the layers. You know what I mean?
And I wish it didn't take that long. It just does. It's like we've learned it takes a year to undo all of our thinking and another year to rebuild it up. So it's like some of you guys are going, dang it, this is going to take forever, you know? But it doesn't eventually. It's exponential.
But like anything, you just have to start, okay? If you start there again, back to what we said earlier, if you don't live this out of your identity in Christ and you think we have to go be this perfect missional community, you can't. You won't. It's the messiest way of being church you'll ever be because it's people, right? It is super messy.
The reality is your church is already really messy. You just don't see it. Right? It looks really neat on Sunday. It's not. Lives are being broken, falling apart. There's a mess going on. You just don't see it. Okay, lots of hands went up. And
Can I flip it around the other way? Talk about the non-believers.
Yep.
Not yet believers?
Yeah, not yet.
Hopeful. Always hopeful.
Yeah.
We know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Their initial attraction, obviously, to this missional community, it's not to learn about the story of God. It's not about, living the mission of Jesus. Is their initial attraction, I'm just trying to understand, to being invited into this group is community.
Relationship.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, that was going to be the next thing. After we talk about shared leadership, so if we get shared leadership in place, then what we're doing, if we have a couple other Christians with us, we spend a significant, at least I did, a significant amount of time getting to know their stories. So this story-formed rhythm deal, we believe everybody is living their life underneath a grand narrative, and if it's not the narrative of the gospel, that other narrative is trumping the gospel in their life. And we want the gospel to be the grand narrative under which all things have to be submitted and redeemed. And so one of the first things I'll do with a group, when I get a shared leadership and a few Christians, I will get to know their stories, and we'll all get to know each other's stories and find out where we're not living in line with the truth of the gospel. And then we'll practice bringing the gospel to bear on their lives. We do that in a lot of ways. I do that through communion. Remember taking this eating rhythm, we say, believers as family, we have a family meal, it's called the Lord's Supper. We should take it together regularly and proclaim Him regularly to each other. And so we take the bread and the cup, and I started doing this with my community. It's been very helpful for a lot of communities to train them. And I'll say, okay, identify with the elements and identify your gospel need as you think about the elements. I said, for instance, this last year is a hard year for me. I felt, this is like 6 months ago. I'm looking at my life in the last year, and I wish I'd done a whole lot more. I feel like we didn't accomplish as much as I'd like to as a church. And I'm looking at the bread just saying, I just need Jesus' righteousness to be sufficient for me. His life given for me has got to be my hope, because if I trust in my life this last year, I'm in trouble. And right now, I'm guilty and feeling beat up because of it. And I need His blood poured out to forgive me. And so I said something like that, and then they were going to speak it to me. So someone else grabbed the elements and said, Jeff, Christ's righteousness is sufficient for your unrighteousness, for your life not live fully in the way you want it to be or the way you think He wants it to be. His life is sufficient for you. And His blood was poured out for the forgiveness of your sins. In the ways you didn't do what you're supposed to do this last year, He already died for. And the ways in which you're beating yourself up because you're trusting in your own righteousness, He died for. And so it was that kind of thing. And so everybody did it. They proclaimed their need, and then they proclaimed the gospel to the need. And when you do that with a bunch of believers enough times, they grow competent, coming back to your question earlier, in sharing the gospel. But they also become a gospel people, because they hear it over and over and over. So when we're forming a group, we want shared leadership who can do that. Shared leadership so that eventually you can send more to start others. You don't start it by yourself. You start it with someone who you want to train to eventually go start another missional community. Mine happened to be my wife and I, and we prayed like God would give us somebody. I didn't have anybody, so I said, God, give us some people. He sent me 4 guys, and I just brought them into my group and started training them. And that's what we did.
I'm going to move this on a little bit.
Okay.
This idea of starting with shared leadership is key. Okay? There's no Lone Rangers.
You went backwards, just so you know. I was right here.
Yeah. You want to do this? Or
yeah,
not?
go ahead. No, I wasn't going to do that, because I think that's going to open up another can of worms.
All right.
So. You can look at it later.
All right.
Yeah. If they ask about how to do shared leadership, we can go ahead if you want to. It's just going to take another
I'm only going to open the
minutes.
can, okay? Shared leadership. There's no Lone Rangers in Scripture. You just don't see it in Acts, okay? I know we like to focus on our favorite apostle, and all that, but there's not. We've been given a great gift, I think, through an author by the name of John Frame, and then one of our brothers in the GCM Collective, Drew Goodmanson and David Fairchild, have helped take the Yoda Smart Frame stuff and bring it down to like usable. We try to see leadership through the lens of prophet, priest, and king.
Not role, not like apostle, priest, or prophet, evangelist, pastor, teacher, but perspective.
Okay? Perspective. The only one who had all these perfect was Jesus, okay? Well, none of us alone are, okay? And so we look at it this way. You're not all going to be able to see this, but I'll get out of the way. Okay, what do we usually put at the top there?
Prophet.
Prophet. Jeff, you can be explaining this even while I...
So the top is the prophetic perspective, and that's the people who are looking for the normative. They see the normative. What does God's Word say? What is the truth here? How do we look at the Scripture and see the truth of God normatively? The priestly is the more existential, who says, how do we care for the heart of people? Like, you'll know you're more priestly in your perspective when you read the Bible and you say, how does this make me feel? If someone who reads the Bible and says, what does it say? That's prophetic. Matt Carter last night, prophetic perspective. Okay? A kingly is more situational, saying, how do we apply this to everyday life? Okay? There are some people who, even when they're teaching, it's almost always very practical. They like to teach practical teachings. And so we've found that if you don't have a balance of this in some matter, in some way or another, of your missional community, it'll become an extreme of one perspective. Like, prophetic, what do you think they would do if they led a missional community and they had no other balance?
What?
I just lectured everybody.
Yeah.
It's just going to become a big Bible
It's
study.
going to be a Bible study.
If it's led by a really super prophetic, gifted person. Kingly person into structures, systems, get her done. What will that missional community end up looking like? Social justice, it could be.
It can be really active.
We're just super active. We're not sure why anymore. And we're leaving a trail of bodies, you know what I mean? Everybody's burned out. What about if you're led just completely by a real priest, a shepherding heart, and that's what they're about? What might your missional community become? Support group.
Yep.
But what if you had all three of those, like submitting one to another, right, in the Spirit? What then might your missional community become? A a body, a gospel-centered,
body of Christ.
a gospel-centered, getting it done people who are caring for one another and everybody around them. Okay?
You see, this is also head, heart, hands. Prophet, head, heart, existential, priestly, hands, the kingly.
Another way to think of it.
Yeah, it's just another way to think of it.
This we could do all day on this and how this serves the heck out of us. But I'm just popping the top off. So.
The reason why this is shared, though, is because if you go, well, let's start a missional community, and we're missing one of those. When we see that happen, we coach into the absence. So we find someone else who has that perspective, because they'll ask the questions nobody else would. You know, like if it's led by a lot of priests, we'll say you probably need a kingly or prophetic mix. So when they're talking about how it's going, they say, are you doing anything? Are there strategies in place? You doing something outside your group? Is the gospel central to what you're doing? Is that clear? Are they proclaiming it? And so it's good to have coaching that supports that, or maybe they loan in people for a while and say, come and help us. We want to learn. This is where the body is so important to work together.
And here's the crazy thing. If you don't have one of those perspectives, you don't see it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, think of them as lenses. So I'm pretty kingly. Kind of in our community as an elder, a lot of how we figure out what we're going to do, it's usually the role will fall to me to figure out how are we going to get that done. What's it look like? How are we going to get these people trained? What are we going to do? That's the hill, so we're going to need this kind of supply, you know, to take that hill, you know. And the priests are saying, but whoa, wait, hold on a second. We're going to bind up the last battle, you know, wounded, and you know, and Jeff's keeping us centered on the gospel, you know. And if you don't have, so I'm kingly. I don't see a whole lot of priestly perspective. So when I'm not being priestly, I don't see that I'm not being priestly. Does that make sense? Our priestly leaders, they're just not getting a whole lot done. And they don't notice. They don't. Because they don't have that
Clearly
perspective.
stated from a king's perspective.
That's all I got.
It's true.
That's what I got. Yeah.
So you're saying you have in your community groups, you have 3 of these leaders in your group?
In a perfect world.
Yeah.
Okay, what's what we're shooting
Yeah.
for? It starts out with eldership. That's how that's how we run the world as elders.
We don't have like a senior pastor or hierarchy in our elder
But you
team.
try and intermix this with people. You see the gifts that these people have. And you try
Yeah.
And they're trained in this. So, like, let's just say Dave Wilcox, who's very kingly. We
He's
know
king prophet.
He's
a
kind of a
mixture
king
those two.
prophet.
Yep.
Okay, and everybody kind of has a primary and a secondary kind of bent, right? We know, and we'll tell him clearly, who are the priests in your community that you're submitting to? Because, bro, you will get it done and be teaching the word like crazy, but you won't realize when you're wounding people maybe. Or they're wounded from the battle, because it's a battle. I mean, there's an enemy, right? And our lives suck along the way, too, because we're sinners. And so we have to tell him, who are the priests? Well, I don't know if I have any. Because you can't see them. They're probably the guys that bug you the most, you know what I mean?
Actually, it was a really good exercise with him because when he identified his mission, and by the way, that's one of the third steps we'd say is shared leadership, gospel centrality, forming people in the gospel, clarify a mission. Clarify a mission. We've said that already, but this is so important. When he clarified his mission, he had like 12 people wanting to go on mission with him to start a new missional community. He's basically saying, hey, and he's a smart guy, and he's very articulate. And so he had all these people join him, and I said, that's too many to start. Because you're going to already fill up. You're not going to have any sense that you need to reach any lost people, and you're just going to love being with each other as Christians. So he said, but what do I do with all those people? I said, you get to handpick who gets to go on mission with you. So now look at who you are. You are a king prophet. You need some strong priestly leaders amongst your team. Who are they? Well, he has a particular girl in his group who's really priestly, and she knows her Bible really well. And he said, Christina would probably be one of those. And then he named a few others. And I said, okay, you get to choose. Just because you're going on a mission doesn't mean everybody gets to go with you. You're going to pick some people on your team, and you're going to go.
But we measure success by numbers. So it's always about how big we can get something. No, I'm saying it's humans.
They were like, wait a minute.
I'm saying humans do,
schizophrenia.
right? So we go like, why couldn't we take everybody? Because you're going to start loving each other too much and not loving the lost enough.
Yeah, we'd like to start with 6 to 8 to start with because it allows you to be really focused on a group but have enough that you have enough people with you. So you get much more. I prefer 6 and that right around that range.
That's what we started with.
Yeah, but much more than that, people are like, well, we just got to take
By the
care
way,
of each other.
planners, have not yet believers in your core.
Not like as core leaders, but in your core.
They will
Yeah.
transform. As you disciple them to Christ, that will set a DNA of this is who we are and how we live. They will also help you, I mean, I'm saying through relationship, right? They will help you realize how weird we sound and what we do that freaks out the world. And so as they're being saved, they will help you set a DNA. Don't fear it. We always start with, really, church planting is not church planting. It's like Christian gathering, usually. You know what I mean? And then we try to figure out how to find some lost people.
It's like tons of hands are going
Start
up.
that
So
way,
your
yeah.
hand went up before everybody else's. So
What time's this thing end, Jeremy?
We're not done. We're going to do more after lunch. You guys know that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What?
Quick question, practical question about,
We'll just answer questions for now.
insight and oversight into the different missional cells. Does an elder have kind of input into certain cells so that you can have it split up a little bit easier?
Yeah. Every missional community is under the leadership of an elder. Not in it necessarily, but
And then my second question, have you found any patterns in the type of leaders you have in the missional cells? Is it more likely to be a person with prophetic bent, is more likely to be ready to say, hey, I'm going to go start a missional cell first? Or have you noticed, is there any patterns about...
usually the kings first because they're all about, let's go, you know, and they're not probably ready, but yeah. But the one's not better than the other. You know what I'm saying? We need each other badly. But usually, your kingly types are your leaders. They're more entrepreneurial. They're going to get it done, right? But not necessarily knowing what's going on behind them. As people.
In Alan's book, he probably referred to those as apostolic leaders. And a lot of times, we found that these two tend to be more apostolic. Not always, but the prophet king kind of tend to be a little bit more apostolic. You'll find the apostolic gift use it in those two more than, not always, but sometimes.
Okay. Sir, and then you. Okay.
Dave takes 6 and 12. What do you do with the other 6?
They're still in another missional. With the other, they're going to stay in the other missional community until another leader goes and they go with them. They're already in a missional community. Yeah.
That group was needing to multiply. It was getting too big. By the way, 20. You just have to trust me on this, and it's just not our estimation. Kind of been proven for a while. Around 20, you start to cap out. And then it'll creep back to the people most like each other because it's easiest to hang out. Like we disciple our kids the same way, or we like the same foods, or the same shows are funny to us, and right? And so you'll creep back to 12 or 13 that are most like each other, and then generally that never grows again.
We have to sometimes restart those. Pull them out, go, let's go. I got a new mission. Let's go get some
So you have to begin with multiplication in mind and know who you're always discipling up to be your next leader, your co-leaders, right? Because if you hit 20 and you do nothing about it because it feels good, and you get to 25, and then you get to 30 because you go like, hey, ours is bigger than everybody else's. Woohoo, we're awesome. And then it'll creep back on you, and then you'll have lost it. And part of that why is because size of, where you're hanging out is probably in a home at this level, at a missional community level, and relational capacity, Some people, I'm pretty out there, you can tell. I have a lot of friends. But most people, there's like, average human has not as many, And so they tap out relationally. And then the other thing is once it creeps back to the 12 or 13 that are most alike and kind of love each other, let's say they are the nicest, most welcoming bunch in the whole planet. When outsiders, newbies come, they just sense they don't quite get the joke or fit in, you know what I'm saying? Because they're a little cliquey now. You got to be on that. If you really want to see a multiplication, a movement, you got to plan for multiplication, and you got to be letting people know, or it seems bait and switch. We love each other. What do you mean half of us are going somewhere else? Surprise, you are. Don't do that. That freaks people out.
Yeah, state that real clearly from the beginning.
I found that when we, in our particular house church, when we get more than about 20, 25 people, it starts becoming really easy for individuals to become complacent and hide and not be active.
It's hard to see their gospel need. It's hard to have a place for everybody to have a part.
That's right. The other thing that happens is the longer you do that, the longer you convince people that they don't ever have to be sent and lead. So the sooner you can say, who's next? Let's go. The more you're embedding into the DNA of your movement ongoing multiplication and sending. So when I hear churches go, we want to be a church planting church, and I go, when are you going to start? You better start when you form your core of your first church. Don't say, well, one day we will be. You'll never be.
We're thinking at 5
You'll
years
give money
we'll
to
get
church
that.
planting, but you won't church plant yourself. You've got to build it into the very DNA of the first thing you start. Now, if you go, well, we didn't, you can embed it in, but you've got to work really hard, and it's going to feel like a tear. And you've got to prepare people for that and say, guess what? The gospel ministry work we do causes us to have to grieve. And that's just a thing I'm going to encourage you in. If you don't prepare your people for it, and then you don't tell them it's going to hurt, and then you don't help them grieve, because you need to, like when kids leave home,
they won't want to do it again.
They have to grieve empty nest syndrome, and they'll go, I'm not doing that ever again. That hurt too much. So you got to let them grieve, and you got to let them rejoice in the fact that what they did was for the sake of Jesus' glory and the ongoing work of the gospel, because that's what their life is all about.
Okay.
Make sense?
This guy was next here.
Okay.
How do you get the unbeliever?
I'm sorry, your name?
Steve.
Steve, I hate saying this guy. I apologize. Steve.
How do you get the unbeliever to join the missional community? It's like, hey, I'm Buddhist, but I'm joining the Christian missional community group.
We don't use that language. So the only people who would functionally join a missional community group would people who start the missional community group and form a covenant around the mission that they're going to go after people with. And then the people that are a part of it, like my neighbors, we just started loving them like family. We'd invite them into our parties, celebrate, eat together, bless them, listen to them well, pray for them. And life is intersecting like this. So they don't know, because see, it's not an event. All they know is there's these people Jeff lives life with, and we got invited into this life.
How are you telling them that they're like early on that you're going to reach these?
Oh, I tell the core that.
How much of Soma is participating in this? 100%, 50%?
We wouldn't call them Soma unless they were doing it. That's our membership.
See, because
I mean,
we
don't use
started
that
this
language,
way.
but-
We started this way. We didn't get a zillion people in a place and then figure out what to do with them. We started this way. So
How many people, like, when y'all gather as a big group, how many people is that?
there are people that are coming to the gathering, to go to your question, that are not yet living this life. I don't know how they find us.
Probably 20% of those that are, would you say 20%?
Are not.
Are not involved.
Maybe 20. Maybe
Yeah.
20.
But we wouldn't
so
call
we're-
them Soma, and we don't. Like we say publicly, Soma is us on mission in these missional communities.
In covenant together.
Yeah. So and
We're in a
and
warehouse without signs. We're not in the phone book. We don't put out flyers. We don't invite anybody.
And we've done everything we can to avoid attracting people that way, and we still do. So we're
But they
trying
still
not
show
to.
up. I'm like, and I ask them, how did you show up? That's our church growth strategy
Yeah,
right
that's
there.
right. Just be unknown.
Don't
and hide
invite
out.
anybody. No.
Yeah.
We invite them into our lives. See? Don't miss that. We invite them into our lives. When someone says, hey, I got a lost name.
By the way, before you ask the question, all those who have questions, write them down, because we're going to have a big Q&A session in this afternoon. So just make sure you're writing them down so you don't forget them. We won't just try to skip over you. Yeah.
You did say you would have not yet believers in your core?
He was, when he said core, he was saying when you plant a church, make sure you include them in to the original work that you're going to do, because otherwise your people will never learn how to do evangelism and discipleship.
As part of
That's
their
what he was
world.
saying. But I clarified and said, we're not talking core leadership. Okay?
Sorry, we're moving so fast, you know. This is like
Yeah.
6 months of training in an hour and a half.
Yeah. So my missional community that started this last fall, when we began, we started eating meals together and started getting to know each other. There were some unbelievers in those meals and parties and stuff. And then some Christians joined us, and I saw those guys as guys I was supposed to train, and I knew the only way I could train them was in the real life of mission. They had to see me lead people to Christ and disciple them. They had to do it with me. Because if they didn't experience that, they were going to just reproduce a Christian group that hangs out together, not people who know how to share the gospel and make disciples.
You know how we know that? Because that's what we accidentally did at the beginning.
Yeah.
We had a
We
whole
made
bunch
that
of us
mistake
hanging
too.
out on mission together, and then we split them into fours and sent them out on mission, and they kind of knew how to hang out as Christians together. And it took a while, you know what I'm saying, to figure out, wait a minute, that's not why we were sent. And,
I think it's lunch, and we're going to have to stop. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, we're coming back. We have a lot of time still, so we've got more to do.
See you at the next session.
Yeah.